He thought his twin daughters were gone forever, dead for 3 long years. Then one day, on a dusty bus, he heard a voice singing. It was them. But the truth waiting for him didn't just break his heart. It shattered his entire life before the story even began. Where are you watching this from? Let us know down in the comments. And if these stories move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back and experience the full story. They brought out the furniture first. Chairs with broken legs, bureaus missing drawers. Then it was the livestock, bone-thin cattle with ribs you could count from 20 paces, hens too old to lay eggs, a mule with a limp and cloudy eyes. The hammer came down again and again, and still the crowd stayed. Dust clung to their clothes like the poverty clung to our town. But everything changed when the children stepped onto that platform. I was tying down a sack of feed on my wagon when the shift in the crowd caught my eye. The auctioneer's voice had faltered, and the usual murmur of bids died. That silence had weight to it like a storm about to break. I turned and saw them. 2 figures, small, fragile. The boy stood slightly in front of the girl, his shoulders squared like a man twice his age. His face was too thin, jaw clenched so tight I imagined his teeth might crack. The girl clutched his hand like it was the only real thing left in the world. Her dress hung on her like a flag on a windless day, shapeless and limp. Her eyes, they weren't looking at the crowd. They were looking beyond us, to the mountains. That was the first thing that made my feet stop moving. The auctioneer cleared his throat, called them a fine young pair, claimed they were capable of light labor. I could hear the lie in his voice. Not because they weren't capable, but because he didn't believe what he was saying. No one did. Those children weren't being sold to work. They were being sold to disappear. The boy, he looked maybe 8. The girl, 6. But age doesn't mean much when a child's been through what they had. You could see it in the way their eyes never stayed still for long. The way they flinched at the sound of boots on wood. The way the boy stood guard, though he had nothing to fight with but bones and fear. I didn't come to town to buy children. I needed nails and lamp oil and a bag of flour if there was money left. But the way that girl stared at the mountains, it was the direction of my ranch. The only place I'd ever known peace. The bidding started low. $10. Then 5. Then silence. Not a single soul raised a hand. Not even to offer less. It wasn't just that they were weak or sickly. It was that they were trouble. You could feel it coming off them like heat off a forge. No family, no property, no name anyone recognized. And in a town like ours, that meant danger. I thought of walking away. Truly, I did. The world had taken enough from me already, my husband, my youth, half my sanity. But I couldn't unsee the way the boy's hand tightened around his sister's. Like he'd fight the whole town with nothing but those skinny arms if it meant she'd be safe. The auctioneer's voice turned bitter with frustration. His hammer hovered in the air like it didn't want to fall. That's when my hand went up. 5. It wasn't a bid. It was a line in the sand. Every eye turned on me, some in surprise, some in judgment, and one pair of eyes watched with amusement. Thaddeus Kane. He was leaning against the post of the saloon veranda, his coat too fine for the weather, boots polished like he didn't live in the same dust as the rest of us. He hadn't bid, hadn't even moved when the children were let out. But now, with my hand in the air, his expression changed. I saw recognition in his eyes. Not of me, of the children. I didn't know it then, not fully. But that was the moment I stepped across a line I couldn't return from. Kane pushed himself off the post and walked toward the platform with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd parted for him like they always did. He asked the auctioneer for another look at the children, reached out, turned the boy's chin with his gloved hand, inspected the girl's arms. The boy flinched. The girl froze. Then Kane shook his head, muttered something about damaged goods, and walked away again. But his eyes flicked back to me as he passed, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Possession. He had owned them once, and he intended to own them again. The auctioneer looked at me, confirmed my bid. I nodded. That should have been the end of it. But Kane turned back. $10, he said, loud and clear. My stomach twisted. $10 was more than I had to spend that week. More than the children were worth to anyone except him. 12, I said. Kane's smile didn't reach his eyes. 15. I hesitated. I felt every dollar like a stone in my gut. That money was food, repairs, a new roof before winter. But I saw the look on the boy's face when Kane raised his voice, saw the way he stepped in front of his sister like a man shielding her from gunfire. 20, I said. The crowd gasped. Not at the price, but at the audacity. $20 for 2 children no one wanted. 2 children Kane did want. The hammer fell. Sold. I expected relief. But what I got was the sheriff. Colt pushed through the crowd, hand resting near his gun like he didn't trust how this would end. He asked if I was sure, said Kane had a claim, that the children might be indentured. That it wasn't so simple. But nothing about it was ever simple. They followed me back to my wagon like shadows. Didn't speak. Didn't cry. Just walked. Silent as ghosts. I helped the girl up first. Her hands were ice. The boy climbed in behind her, sitting with his back against the sideboard like he was waiting for someone to kick it in. As I climbed onto the driver's bench, I felt the weight of eyes again. Kane stood at the edge of the square, arms folded, smile gone. He didn't need to say it. I knew what I'd just bought wasn't just children. I'd bought secrets. And secrets in this town had a habit of getting people killed. The wheels of my wagon groaned louder than usual as we rolled out of the auction square. I heard the creak in every turn of the axle, felt the uneven jolt of the ruts through the wooden bench beneath me. But it wasn't the weight of cargo that strained the old wagon. It was the weight of something else. Silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles at dusk or before a rainstorm. No, this silence was the kind that pressed against your ribs and made you second-guess your heartbeat. The children hadn't spoken a word since I claimed them. They just sat there in the back, legs drawn up, arms wrapped around their knees like they could fold themselves into nothing. I didn't look at them right away. Truth be told, I didn't know how. My hands stayed tight on the reins, guiding Sage, the only creature I truly trusted in this world, down the dusty road that led out of town. I kept my eyes on the trail, but my mind circled around the truth I hadn't wanted to admit back in the square. I didn't buy children. I'd never even considered it. And yet here I was, heading home with 2 of them in my wagon like sacks of flour, and not a single plan about what to do next. The sun beat down hard for late spring, too early for this kind of heat. My shirt stuck to my back, my bonnet clung to my forehead, and yet I didn't complain. I didn't dare speak, not with Kane's shadow still hanging over me. I glanced behind once. Just once. The boy Tommy, I would later learn, hadn't taken his eyes off the road. He sat stiff as a fence post, arms curled around his sister. The girl leaned into him, her eyes fluttering like she was falling asleep, but too afraid to let herself go. There was something broken in both of them. Not in the way kids break a toy and cry because it won't work anymore. No, this kind of broken ran deeper. Like someone had taken a chisel to their souls and carved out what little softness remained. I didn't ask questions that day. Not on the road home. I just drove. The ranch came into view just as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills. The land stretched wide and lonesome, 300 acres of dust, scrub, and the ghost of greener days. The barn leaned westward like it was tired of standing. The house, though sturdy, carried the wear of too many winters and too few repairs. Still, it was home. As I pulled into the yard, I felt the shift again. The children didn't move, but I sensed them noticing, cataloging every corner, every tool, every path, the way children in danger always do, mapping escape routes they hope they won't need. I set the brake and turned around. Their eyes met mine for the first time since the square. The boys were wary, guarded. There was no fear in them, not like the kind that makes a child cry or hide. His fear had turned into something else long ago. Coldness, readiness. like a soldier waiting for orders that might never come. The girl was different. Her gaze slipped past me to the hills again, as if expecting someone to come out of them. Her hand clutched the frayed hem of her dress, twisting it silently. I offered water first, bread and salt next. They didn't take it right away. But I left it there on the porch, and when I went inside to light the lamps, I heard quiet chewing behind me. They hadn't eaten in days, I was sure of it. Not properly. The way Tommy shielded the crust of bread with his arm told me he wasn't just hungry. He was used to someone taking food from him. That night, I gave them the small room off the kitchen. It was nothing more than 4 walls, a narrow bed, and a quilt my mother had sewn when I was little. I watched from the hallway as the girl curled into the blanket like a newborn fox, her tiny frame swallowed whole. The boy sat beside her on the floor, back against the wall, eyes never closing. He didn't trust me. That was fair. I didn't trust myself either. I stayed up most of the night on the porch, rifle across my lap. The coyotes howled in the distance, but that wasn't what kept me alert. It was the memory of Cain's eyes. The way he looked at them, like he'd misplaced something expensive and was calculating how to get it back. At some point near dawn, I must have dozed, because I woke to the creak of floorboards inside. I went in quiet. Slow. The boy was standing in the kitchen, holding a knife. He hadn't touched the bread I left on the table. He wasn't trying to steal. He was just standing there, waiting, listening. He didn't flinch when he saw me. He just lowered the blade, put it gently on the counter, and sat down on the floor. That was when I asked his name. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Tommy." Just that, nothing more. And the girl? "Lily," he whispered. He didn't press. The days that followed passed in a strange sort of rhythm. I worked the land. They watched. I mended fence posts. They stayed near the porch. I cooked simple meals. They picked at them. I didn't force anything. Children don't trust words. They trust consistency. By the 3rd day, Lily followed me out to the barn. By the 5th, Tommy let Sage eat from his hand. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were starting to settle. I was wrong. It was a week after the auction when the first rider came. Just after midday, while I was skinning a rabbit, I saw the dust trail rise along the ridge. 1 horse. Dark coat. Fast gait. The kind of speed that didn't match the laziness of a casual visit. Tommy saw it too. He stepped in front of Lily without a word. I reached for the shotgun I kept near the door. The rider didn't dismount. Just called out from the saddle. Said he was from Cain. Said I had something that didn't belong to me. I told him I paid fair at auction. He said, maybe I should return the merchandise before I found myself short a barn or 2. He didn't respond. He rode off, slow and deliberate, letting the threat hang behind him like smoke. Tommy didn't speak until long after the rider was gone. He was sitting on the porch again, sharpening a stick into a point with a rock. He didn't look up when he spoke. He'll send more. I didn't ask who he was. I knew, but I needed to know more. Why? I finally asked. Tommy didn't answer at first. Then he said, because we saw what we weren't supposed to. That's when I noticed the scars. Not the kind you get from falling or clumsy mistakes. The kind that tell a story. Burn marks. Thin and deliberate. Rope abrasions. A jagged line along Lily's wrist where skin had healed poorly. My stomach turned. I didn't sleep that night either. Because what I'd brought home wasn't just 2 scared children. I'd brought home a secret so dangerous that a man like Cain would burn a house to the ground just to bury it. And I started to wonder if, in saving them, I hadn't just painted a target on all 3 of us. I'd like to say the children adjusted. That over time, the weight of their past lightened, that the nightmares faded, and they began to laugh like children ought to. But it doesn't work that way. Healing isn't quiet. It's not gentle. It fights you tooth and nail, makes you bleed before it ever offers peace. Tommy didn't trust silence. He listened for sounds I couldn't hear, small creaks in the walls, the cry of a hawk, the low snort of Sage from the stable. He slept with his shoes on, even under the quilt. Lily, on the other hand, took to quiet places beneath the porch, behind the water barrels, anywhere dark and small. as if the shadows gave her safety I never could. I let them have their spaces, but I watched closely because I could feel it coming. Cain wasn't a man who let go, and now he had a reason to return. The second warning came on a Wednesday. A dog carcass strung up on my front gate. Its throat slit, eyes still open, body swaying in the morning wind. No note, no rider. Just a clear message. You've been marked. Tommy saw it before I did. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared. Lily came up behind him, took one look, and buried her face in his back. I burned the body and checked every window that night. Loaded every shell I had. Counted them twice. 18 in total. Not enough. But I wouldn't run, not yet. Because Cain had made a mistake. He thought I was just some old widow with an empty house and nothing left to lose. He didn't know what I'd buried in the orchard, or what I'd done the year the winter took my son. He didn't know what I was still capable of. 3 days passed with no incident. Tommy started asking questions about rifles, about fences, about how deep a ditch needed to be to trip a horse. His eyes weren't filled with curiosity. They were calculating. Lily began drawing. Scraps of charcoal, bits of bark. She never showed me the pictures, but I found one by accident. Folded under the porch rail. A crude sketch of a man's face. Deep eyes, square jaw, wide mouth curled in a grin that didn't reach the eyes. I didn't have to ask who it was. Cain's shadow was already here. By the end of the week, I stopped sleeping. Instead, I sat on the roof with a lantern covered in red cloth, eyes scanning the horizon. I placed trip lines along the northern fence and buried glass near the barn. Primitive, yes, but sometimes the old ways are the only ways. And then one night, the sound of splintering wood, not a branch, not a coyote, the sharp crack of a doorframe yielding under force. I was out the window before I could think. Boots on, rifle loaded, eyes wide. The kitchen door was ajar. Inside, I heard movement. Not loud, not reckless. Measured. I crept low, sliding in through the side, and saw him. Not Cain, not yet. This one was younger, thin, pale, with a silver tooth that flashed when he turned. He held a knife, long and thin like a boning blade. He wasn't looking for food. He was looking for the children. I raised the rifle. He didn't flinch. You shoot, he said calmly. You'll wake the whole ridge. And Cain ain't far. I fired anyway. The bullet missed his chest by a finger's width and buried itself in the doorframe behind him. That got his attention. He lunged. The rifle was too long to swing quick, so I dropped it and grabbed the poker from the hearth. Caught him in the jaw. He stumbled but didn't fall. Slashed once, cut deep into my arm. Pain flared. I swung again. This time, I heard the crunch. He hit the floor hard, silver tooth rolling loose across the boards. I stood over him, bleeding and shaking, but still upright. You tell Cain, I growled. Next time, he comes himself. He didn't reply, just whimpered. I bound his wrists, dragged him to the edge of the property, and left him tied to a fence post. No food, no horse, just enough rope to make him work for freedom. It was a message, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Tommy sat by the fire when I returned, eyes on the flame. I heard, he said. Lily was asleep on the couch, curled up in the quilt like a kitten. Is he dead? Tommy asked. No. You should have killed him. His voice didn't waver, didn't rise. That frightened me more than anything else. You're a child, I said. He turned his head slowly. I wasn't when Cain took us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The next day, I sent a letter. I hadn't spoken to Sheriff Eli in 5 years, not since he failed to arrest the men who killed my husband over a cattle dispute. But now I needed him, or at least his badge. I didn't trust him to do what was right. I just needed him to delay Cain. The letter was brief. Cain is hunting children. I bought them fair. They have something he wants buried. Come armed or don't come at all. I tied it to Sage and sent her down the trail alone. If the old mare made it, maybe help would come. If not, we'd fight without it. That night, Tommy spoke again. This time, he told me everything. Cain had kept them in a ranch house north of Lancer Ridge, out of sight, off the maps. There were others. 7, maybe more, all children. Cain called it a school, said he was training them. But the truth was uglier. They were made to steal, eavesdrop, poison wells, burn ledgers, spy on rivals. Cain loaned them out to wealthy men who didn't want blood on their own hands. If one disobeyed, they disappeared. One boy, Jesse, tried to run. Tommy saw what Cain did to him. Said it took 3 hours to die. But Lily, she saw more. She'd found a ledger in Cain's office. Names, numbers, places, and a page at the back with prices beside children's names. She showed it to Tommy. They ran that night. Didn't stop until the desert nearly swallowed them. But Cain found them again. Sold them into a different kind of slavery, a mining camp near Hollow's End. They only escaped because a flood killed half the crew. Then came the auction. They were never supposed to end up in that town. They were supposed to vanish. Sold off. Forgotten. But I had been there. And I had changed the story. Now I was in it. When dawn came, I was on the roof again. Lantern lit. Eyes fixed westward. I knew he would come. Not in secret this time. Cain didn't like being made a fool. And men like him always come to finish what they start. It began with dust. Not the wind-swept kind that rolls in from the flats, but a long, steady cloud rising on the western ridge, creeping toward us like a slow-moving storm. Even before I saw the riders, I felt them. Felt it in the way the birds went silent. The stillness of the goats. Even Sage, old as she was, snorted once and backed deeper into the barn. Tommy stood beside me on the porch, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. I told him to go inside, but he shook his head. I want to see him. He didn't mean Cain. He meant the choice he'd made when he ran. The dust grew legs. Horses. 6 of them. Men dressed in black and brown, rifles slung low, bandoliers across their chests like war paint. At the center was a tall man on a white stallion, hat tipped low, long duster coat flapping in the breeze. Even from 100 yards out, I knew it was him, Cain. He hadn't changed much. Older, maybe. But his posture, the arrogance in his shoulders, hadn't shifted an inch. He rode like he owned the land. Like God himself had given him the right to take whatever he pleased. When they reached the gate, Cain didn't stop. He and his men rode straight through the broken fence, trampling what little remained of my tomatoes. I stood my ground on the porch, rifle in hand, every part of me trembling with rage and readiness. Cain dismounted slowly, brushed dust from his sleeves. And then, as if we were 2 neighbors meeting for tea, he smiled. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Martha Goodwin, I thought you died with your husband in that barn fire." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. Cain turned slightly, scanning the property. His eyes moved like fingers, touching everything. The shed, the well, the broken tools beside the coop. The silence stretched between us until finally he looked me square in the eye. "You've been busy," he said. "Heard you bought 2 of mine. They're not yours." He chuckled. Slow and deep. "You paid for livestock, not children. Thought you'd know the difference." I raised the rifle half an inch. One of his men shifted, hand to his hip. Cain lifted a finger. "Easy, boys," he said without looking away from me. "No need to get rowdy, not yet." Behind me, the front door creaked. Lily stepped out, barefoot, small, holding nothing but a piece of rope she'd twisted into a knot. Her eyes locked on Cain's. There was no fear in her face, just cold recognition. Cain's smile faded. "You," he said. Lily didn't speak, just stood beside me, her fingers grazing my skirt like she needed to remember I was real. Cain took a step forward. "You've seen something that belongs to me." I shifted my grip on the rifle. "She saw what you are." He tilted his head. "And what's that?" "Adsovard." The word hung in the air like smoke from a fresh shot. Cain didn't move, didn't blink, but something in his face changed something dark. slid behind his eyes. And for the first time, I saw the man behind the charm. He stepped back slowly. "Well then," he said, gesturing to his men. "If she won't return what's mine, I suppose we'll take it by force." "You're welcome to try," I said. Cain laughed. A short, mirthless sound. "Woman, this ain't a siege. It's a courtesy. I gave you the chance to surrender. What comes next is on you." He mounted his horse. "By sundown," he said, "we'll be back." And then he was gone. The hours crawled after that. We fortified the windows with broken furniture, nailed shutters tight, and tied noise traps near the perimeter. I made Tommy memorize the back route through the root cellar. Told him if it came down to it, he'd take Lily and run. He refused. "I won't leave you." "You will," I said, loading another shell. "You'll keep her safe. That's what matters." The sun dropped lower. Still no sign of Sheriff Eli. Not that I truly expected him. Some men wear badges to serve. Others wear them to hide. I checked the rifle's chamber one last time. Clean, loaded, oiled. My arm still burned from the cut the silver-toothed boy had given me, but I could hold steady. I'd fought with worse. At dusk, the air changed. A single gunshot cracked in the distance, then another, and then the sound I'd been waiting for: hoofbeats. Many. Cain didn't bring 6 this time. He brought 15. The first shot came from the shed. It was Tommy. He waited until the lead rider passed the second fence, then fired into the air. A warning. The horse bucked. The rider tumbled. And cows erupted. Bullets tore through the side of the barn. I crouched low behind the water barrels and returned fire, dropping one of Cain's men as he tried to flank left. Lily stayed hidden inside, just as we'd practiced, beneath the false floorboards under the hearth. The battle wasn't elegant. It wasn't strategic. It was survival. Screams. Splinters. The smell of sweat and gunpowder and blood mixing into something old and familiar. I shot until the barrel burned my palms, then switched to the revolver. By the time the moon rose, 6 of them were dead. 3 more wounded. The rest scattered like rats. But Cain didn't run. I found him behind the stable, bleeding from a graze across his shoulder, pistol in hand. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked at me like a man robbed of something sacred. "Do you know what you've done?" he growled. "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "I saved them." Cain raised his gun, but not fast enough. I fired first. The bullet hit him just above the heart. He staggered, dropped to his knees, looked at me like he couldn't believe it. "Not like this," he whispered. And then he fell. It took an hour to bury the bodies. We stacked the guns in the shed. I burned what was left of their camp. Sheriff Eli arrived 2 days later. He took one look at the wreckage, listened to the story, and nodded slowly. "Self-defense," he said. "Looks clean to me." He asked no questions, filed no report. But before he left, he handed me a worn envelope. Inside was a list. Names, locations, bank codes, evidence. The same ledger Lily had found, copied in Cain's own hand. "Found this on the White Stallion," Eli said. "Thought you'd know what to do with it." I did. The world had to know what Cain had done. And maybe what children like Tommy and Lily had survived. Tommy started sleeping more. Lily planted flowers near the well. And I sat on the porch each evening, rifle by my side, eyes on the ridge. Not waiting, just watching. Because some storms pass, but others return. And now I was ready for either. 3 weeks passed. The blood had long dried in the dirt. The scent of gunpowder faded, though sometimes on sleepless nights I still swore I could taste it in the air. The children had begun returning to a rhythm, a fragile sense of calm. But I knew better. Quiet is not peace. Quiet is simply the sound the world makes when it's catching its breath. And somewhere beyond the hills, I knew men like Cain still breathed. The ledger Sheriff Eli gave me sat in the bottom drawer of my desk, wrapped in cloth. It had a weight that didn't come from paper. Each page felt like a scream. Names, dates, amounts, Dozens of children, sold like cattle. Destinations scribbled in coded shorthand, some I recognized as towns too poor to ask questions, others were initials I couldn't decipher. But one name kept appearing beside the largest sums. V.E. Whoever he wasn't just buying, he was orchestrating. I didn't want to chase ghosts. I'd killed one devil already, and still hadn't found the peace I thought it might bring. But the more I read, the more I knew. This wasn't over. It was a Thursday when the stranger came. Just past noon, in the quiet heat of early summer. He didn't ride a horse, didn't come with a badge or a threat. He walked, one step at a time, with a limp on his right leg and a long black coat that didn't suit the sun. I saw him from the porch, sipping tea and watching Tommy dig fence posts. He stopped at the gate and waited. Didn't call out. Didn't wave. Just stood. I set my cup down, rifle in my lap. "You're far from town," I said. He smiled with only half his mouth. "I tend to be." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it slid across the skin like a blade, sharp and slow. "I'm looking for someone," he said, "or rather, something. Try the sheriff." I did. "Try again." He stepped closer. I didn't lift the rifle. "Not yet. I believe you have a ledger that used to belong to a man named Cain." My fingers twitched. "And who are you?" "I'm a man who spent the last 5 years cleaning up Cain's messes. A man who knows how many graves it took to buy his silence. And a man who very much wants to avoid burying more." He wasn't armed. Not visibly, but that didn't make him harmless. He leaned on the fence post like he'd been born there. "Do you know what you're holding, Miss Goodwin? That little book is a noose. And every name in it, dead or alive, has a stake in making sure it stays buried." He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a tin badge. "Not a sheriff's. Not even American. Interpol," he said. "Technically. Though I've long since stopped pretending any border matters." I said nothing. E continued. Cain was small-time. Flashy, but sloppy. The man behind him, V.E., he's not. He runs boys through the southern ports, girls through the mountain roads. He launders their names through charities and churches. The ledger is the first real thread we've had in years. And you're holding it. I finally stood. "And you want it?" "I want justice," he said without blinking. "Whatever that looks like to you." It sounded sincere. Tu sincere. I had known too many men with soft eyes and hard intentions. What if I already sent it to the press? I lied. His face didn't change. Then I hope they understand what kind of fire they've lit. I narrowed my eyes. "You're not afraid of what's in that book?" "No," he said. "I'm afraid of what people might do if they think it'll protect them." He reached into his coat again, slower this time, and handed me a card. No name, no number. Just a black stamp, a circle with a V carved through it. "If you want to find him, V.E., you'll need to come to Black Hollow, 2 days south. Ask for the butcher's widow. She'll know." And with that, he left. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even ask again. He just turned and limped back down the road, disappearing the way he'd come. That night, I didn't sleep. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat by the fireplace, reading the ledger again, this time slower, looking for the name he wouldn't give. V.E. One entry stood out. V.E.B.H. 6 crates, 2F, 4M. 960. Crates. Not children. Not names. Inventory. I stared at the initials. B.H. Black Hollow. He hadn't been lying. The place was real. I packed before dawn. 2 rifles. Ammunition. A blade I hadn't used in 15 years. I left Lily and Tommy with Miss Rayburn in town, the only woman I trusted with them. I told them I had business. I didn't say it might kill me. The road south was cruel. Dusty, uneven. I rode until my legs cramped and the horse foamed. Black Hollow wasn't marked on any map, but I found it just after dusk on the second day, tucked between cliffs like a secret. It wasn't a town. It was a graveyard. Shacks, lined the canyon walls. Barrels burned in the corners. Men watched from windows with eyes like broken glass. No children, no laughter, just the sounds of chains and the clink of bottles. And then I saw her, an old woman with a scar across her chin, standing behind a stall that reeked of copper and meat. Her hands were red to the elbows, but her eyes were clear. "You the widow?" I asked. She didn't answer, just nodded to the back. I followed. Behind her stall, through a curtained doorway, was a narrow room filled with knives, maps, and a single oil lamp. She poured tea without asking. "You brought it?" she said. I didn't ask how she knew. I set the ledger on the table. She opened it with hands that didn't shake. Her eyes flicked down the page. Stopped at one name. "Victor Engel," she said. "That's your VE. Where is he?" She hesitated, and then without a word, lifted her sleeve. There, burned into her skin, was the same circle and V emblem. "They don't let you leave," she whispered. "Not even to die." I leaned forward, "Then help me find him." She stared at me for a long time, then reached behind a stack of crates and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Take this to Bellwether Ridge," she said. "There's a tunnel system beneath the chapel ruins. If he's not there, then he's watching." I took the paper, turned to leave. She caught my wrist. "When you find him," she said, "don't talk. Don't explain. Just end it." I nodded and stepped back into the night. The road to Bellwether Ridge was quiet, and that quiet weighed heavier than noise ever could. Even the birds held their tongues, and the wind seemed to shift away from the direction I traveled. I'd read about places like this in cheap paperbacks, usually sold in dusty corners of saloons, cursed hills, hollowed chapels, the kind of terrain where truth got swallowed whole. But fiction never captured how damn real the silence felt. It took a day and a half to reach the ruins. The chapel stood like a broken tooth atop the ridge, jagged and rotted, but still watching. Its steeple had long since caved in, and weeds wrapped the stone like vines around a dying limb. There was no welcome, just the dry crunch of earth beneath my boots and the long shadow of evening closing in behind me. "You didn't hesitate." The butcher's widow had marked the spot on the map with a rough circle, a cellar door tucked behind the altar. That was the entrance. I stepped over the threshold, past what used to be pews and shattered stained glass. The cross still hung at the front half burnt, its edges blackened. Even God had turned away from this place. Behind the altar, just as promised, a trapdoor lay half covered in moss and ash. I pried it open with the butt of my rifle, and the smell that crawled up was foul, damp, and old, like rot that had learned to breathe. I lit my lantern and descended. The air shifted the moment I passed into the tunnel. The world narrowed into stone and darkness, a tight coil of hallways that seemed to spiral without sense. Water dripped somewhere, chains clinked, and faintly, so faintly I wondered if I imagined it, I heard weeping. The butcher's map showed 3 levels: storage, holding, and something simply marked as the floor. I started at the top. Storage was filled with crates, sealed and nailed. Most were empty, others had documents, clothing, tags, names written in chalk, little shoes wrapped in string. One box had dozens of tarnished dog tags, numbers etched into each one. They weren't soldiers, they were stock. I pushed deeper. The second level was colder. Rusted gates lined the walls, forming cages barely tall enough for a man to stand in. Some still held remnants, blankets, bowls, toys. The walls were scratched with markings that made no sense until you stepped back. Dates, ages, tallies. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept going. The stairs to the final level were carved from natural rock, crude and uneven. My lantern flickered as I descended, as if the flame itself grew afraid, but I held it steady. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, and I froze. There were candles, hundreds of them lining every wall. They illuminated a circular platform elevated in the center like an altar. Around it were chairs, 30 or more, arranged in a perfect ring. Everyone was empty. Everyone faced inward. Atop the platform stood a man, not armed, not startled, just waiting. He wore a black suit, perfectly pressed, and his face was lean and pale, the kind of pale that never saw sunlight. His hair was slicked back, silver at the temples, and his eyes were dead things. "I was wondering when you'd find me," he said softly. His voice echoed strangely in the chamber. I raised my rifle. "You Victor Engel?" He smiled. "I've gone by many names. That one, yes, among others. But let's not pretend this is a trial, Miss Goodwin. You didn't come for answers." I took a step forward. "You trafficked children?" "Yes." "You orchestrated sales across 3 territories?" "Yes." "You paid men like Cain to do your filth?" He tilted his head. "No. Cain was never paid. He volunteered. You'd be surprised how many do." He started down the stairs from the platform, slowly, like a man approaching a piano recital. He didn't blink. "I read the ledger," I said. "I saw every transaction." "I'm sure you did." He stopped 5 feet from me. "And now what? You kill me, and it all ends? Is that the fantasy?" I didn't answer. He chuckled. "You've done well. I won't insult that. You've survived more than anyone ever has. But if you shoot me, you shoot an idea. And ideas don't bleed. They spread." I lowered the rifle slightly, not out of mercy, but because I was tired of aiming at devils who thought words were armor. "I'm not here to talk." "Then why haven't you pulled the trigger?" "Because I want you to see it coming." His face twitched, barely. And then I fired. The shot hit him center chest. He staggered, fell backwards onto the platform, blood blooming like ink across his shirt. He gasped once, then stopped. Just like that. No speech, no curse, no revenge. Just silence. I stepped closer, cautious, checked his pulse. Gone. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything, except the room shifting. Behind me, somewhere deeper in the chamber, something buzzed. Faint, electrical, then a click, and the sound of a recording beginning to play. A voice Engels echoed from hidden speakers. "If you're hearing this," the recording said, "then I've finally been bested. And to the woman holding my ledger, I applaud you. Truly. But don't think you've won. My ledger is only one. I made hundreds, copies, scattered across continents, given to men more ruthless than me. And they will see this as martyrdom." I froze. The recording continued. "You killed a man, but you woke a beast. Enjoy your victory, Miss Goodwin. You'll be hunted now, like the rest of us." The voice faded. The candles dimmed. And somewhere in the distance, I heard boots. Not one pair, not 2, dozens. Coming fast. I didn't wait. I ran. Back up the stairs. Through the cages, past the boxes, out into the chapel, just as the sun began to rise. Smoke trailed in the distance. Black Hollow was burning. I didn't know if it was the stranger or someone else, but the fire spread fast. I mounted my horse and rode hard, the ledger strapped to my back, and the sound of gunshots echoing behind me. I didn't return to the homestead. Not yet. I wrote a letter to Miss Rayburn, told her to take Lily and Tommy and leave town, told her not to wait, told her I'd find them later, if I survived, because the war wasn't over. It had just stepped into the light, and I was ready to drag every last demon with it, one name at a time. The days that followed were a blur of smoke, hoofbeats, and blood. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the candles flickering in that underground room, saw Engel's lifeless face, and heard the hiss of his voice on the recording, warning me that the beast had only been stirred, not slain. He wasn't lying. By the end of the first week, 3 towns burned. Westridge, Halaman, then Dawson, all known to have harbored children sold through Engel's circuit. Whether those children had escaped or lived quiet lives under new names didn't matter. Someone had decided to scorch the earth clean. The message was clear. silence, or die. But what they didn't expect was this: some of us had stopped being afraid. After leaving Black Hollow, I rode south, avoiding rail lines and public roads. I crossed the dry ridges near Perdition's Fork, cut through Devil's Acre, and eventually made it to a cabin just outside Rust Pine. It was empty now, but used to belong to Elias Rourke, a bounty hunter who once put 5 Engel associates in the ground, before they found him hanged by his own lasso. Inside the cabin, I found what I needed: his notes, maps, and 2 revolvers still wrapped in oiled cloth. They hadn't taken everything. By the second week, I had names. Not just middlemen or enforcers, no, the real men behind the curtain. Bankers, judges, priests. Men whose smiles decorated newspapers, whose hands blessed children's foreheads while their ledgers traded those same souls behind closed doors. I picked the nearest one and rode. His name was Franklin Barrow. He owned a grain mill just outside Silas Creek, but his real profit came from the exchange house hidden beneath it. A false floor, 2 guards, and a rotating system of fake paperwork made it invisible to lawmen. But I wasn't a lawman. I watched the place for 2 days. On the 3rd, I struck. 2 guards dead before they heard the hammer click. I dragged Barrow out of his office by his necktie and threw him into the sawdust. He squealed like a piglet, offered me money, names, more lies. I showed him the ledger instead. "You sign this," I said. He blinked, confused. "This one June 3rd, 1877. 2 children. Marked transfer to Northern Territory." Names were Theo and Clara. 5 and 7. "I just approved the transport. You branded them like cattle." I drew the revolver. He wept. I pulled the trigger. News traveled fast. By the time I reached the next name, Gideon Crosley, former magistrate of Burnvale, he'd already left town. But his brother hadn't. Neither had his records. Inside the Crosley Manor, I found a box hidden beneath a trapdoor in the cellar. Inside were dozens of portraits. Children. All black and white, all numbered. One of them was Tommy. I stared at that photo for a long time, my fingers trembling over the edges. He'd been 6 when it was taken. His eyes were wide, unsure. The background behind him was blank, nothing to anchor him to time or place. Just a child catalogued like a specimen. I took the photo and burned the rest. By the 4th week, they knew I was coming. Posters went up. Wanted. The woman with the ledger. Alias. Goodwin. Dangerous. Armed. Reward. 10-0. My face. Crudely sketched, with shadows under the eyes and a smear of ash across one cheek. I kept one copy and shoved it into my saddlebag. Maybe one day I'd laugh at it. More likely, it'd be the last image on someone's bounty list before they came for my throat. I didn't care. Because it wasn't just me anymore. Others started to rise. First, a telegraph operator in Dryfield leaked a list of aliases tied to Engel's network. Then a rancher in Bismarck opened her home to survivors' former transfers, who remembered just enough to testify. A school teacher from Durango published excerpts from the ledger in a penny paper. The machine was cracking, but so were we. I hadn't seen Lily and Tommy in over a month. I kept track of their trail through letters from Miss Rayburn, always signed with a red stamp so I'd know it was real. They were moving, staying one step ahead. That was good, because shadows were hunting them too. One night, in a nameless town west of Calico Ridge, I found a note nailed to the door of my rented shack. "We have the girl." Nothing more. No signature, no location, just the words. I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. I followed every whisper, every trace, every child who'd gone missing in the past 7 days. I crossed into outlaw territory, rode through towns with no names and no sheriffs. I shot 2 bounty hunters who tried to collect my head before I could ask questions. Finally, a barkeep in Greystone muttered something about a convoy headed north, 4 men, 1 wagon, moving fast. He said they had cargo. I rode through the night. I caught up to them in a ravine. The sun was just rising, spilling gold over the cliffs. The wagon had stopped near a creek. 3 of the men were smoking. The 4th was checking the back. I counted 6 horses. One of them had a red scarf tied to the saddle horn. Lily's scarf. I didn't wait. I killed 2 before they stood up. The 3rd fired wild and caught a shot through his mouth. The last ran, but I chased him down and broke his kneecap with the butt of my gun. Then I opened the back of the wagon. It wasn't Lily. It was 3 children I'd never seen before. Terrified. Cold. Wrapped in potato sacks. I stared at them, rage and confusion crashing in my chest. One girl, barely 10, looked up at me and whispered, "Are you the lady from the paper?" I nodded slowly. Then they said you'd come. The trap had failed, but it hadn't been the last. They were baiting me now, using children, using lies, using guilt. Because they knew I wouldn't stop. Because they knew I'd burn it all down. And maybe I would. Maybe I'd keep riding until my hands stopped shaking and the dead stopped whispering. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't just about Lily and Tommy anymore. This was war, and I was its reaper. I spent most of that summer in recovery. The bullet to my ribs hadn't killed me, but it came close. Breathing hurt, walking hurt worse. The old scars I'd carried for years, the burns on my side, the brand on my back ached like they were fresh. But what haunted me most weren't the wounds. It was the silence. The ledger was gone, burned to ash. The names in it, men and women I'd chased across half the frontier, were either dead or scattered. And still, the feeling lingered. That I hadn't finished. That something worse was coming. Rayburn kept us hidden in a rundown homestead near the base of Dustthorn Ridge. The place smelled of cedar and dry roots, but it was quiet, and no one asked questions. She brought supplies from nearby towns. Sometimes others stopped in travelers, outlaws, women with old grudges, and young eyes hardened by fire. They looked to me like I was something I wasn't, like I still had answers. But he didn't. Not anymore. Then came the rider. He arrived just after dawn, wrapped in a sun-bleached cloak, face hidden beneath a brim so wide it cast his features in shadow. His horse was caked in dust and foam, hooves bleeding. I met him out front, hand on my belt, eyes sharp. He didn't draw. He just handed me a note. Then he turned and rode away. No words. No name. The letter was short, written in tight script. South Ridge. 5 days. The last child lives. That was all. No signature, no symbol. Just a place, a time, and a promise. I left that night. Didn't tell Lily. Didn't tell Rayburn. Just left a note by the cot and saddled my horse. I told myself it was better this way, that if it was a trap, no one else would get caught in it. But part of me knew the truth. I was chasing ghosts. South Ridge wasn't on any map. It wasn't even a proper town, just a scatter of buildings near an old salt flat where the wind howled louder than any prayer. I arrived on the 5th day, ribs throbbing with every step, and found the place empty. No fires. No children. No soul in sight. Just silence. Then, behind the chapel ruins, I found the mark. 3 stones, set in a triangle, a symbol from the ledger. The old network. Still breathing. Still hunting. They came at dusk. Not 1 or 2, but dozens. Men in gray coats and wide-brimmed hats, women with knives in their boots and rifles in hand. Not bounty hunters, not mercenaries. These were something else. A brotherhood. I recognized one Jules Cutter, thought dead in San Elmo 2 winters back. Another was Clara Vant, who used to run messages for the Crowsley outfit before she disappeared. And at their center stood the man I never expected to see again. Judge Harper. His beard was whiter now. His badge gone. But his eyes hadn't changed. "You always were too stubborn to die," he said. "And you were always too proud to hide." "This isn't hiding," he replied. "This is legacy." I spat. "Legacy of what? Orphans and ashes?" He smiled. "Of order. They didn't kill me. Not right away. They brought me into the chapel ruins and chained me to the altar. A twisted sort of poetry. Harper stood over me and spoke like a preacher. He talked of a new West, one shaped by fear and force. No law, just control. You burned our books, he said. But you can't burn the idea. What idea? That some men were born to lead, and others to obey. I laughed. Even bleeding, even broken, I laughed. He didn't like that. He slammed a fist into my face and left me in the dark. That night, I dreamed of fire. But it wasn't my fire. It was Lily's. She found me again. I don't know how. Maybe the same way she found me last time, through whispers, smoke trails, and a sixth sense I never understood. All I know is the chains were gone by dawn, and standing beside me, torch in one hand and a rifle in the other, was Lily. You left again, she whispered. I had to. She nodded. So do I. Behind her stood 6 others. Women and men I didn't know, but I recognized the look in their eyes. Survivors. Every one of them. We didn't wait. The wind carried smoke and screams before the sun even broke the ridge. Lily and her crew moved like shadows cutting through the ruins, breaking their lines. I took down Harper's lieutenant with a crowbar to the throat and stole his pistol. The pain in my side lit like wildfire, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not now. I found Harper trying to flee through the salt flats, rifle slung across his back, blood on his lip. He saw me and froze. Please, he said. I remembered the children, the auctions, the mines, the brands. No. I pulled the trigger. Once, twice. The wind took his body. The salt turned the blood to rust. And I didn't look back. We buried the dead, mourned the lost. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe maybe this was the end. Maybe the West had bled enough. But Lily shook her head. It's not over, she said. There are still pieces left. Still men hiding behind curtains and coin. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. That night, by a fire that didn't burn for revenge but for warmth, she gave me a new book. The cover was plain, the pages blank. Start a new one, she said. Not for blood, for truth, for memory. He hesitated. Then I took it, and I wrote the first name, Lily Harrow, survivor, fighter, sister not by blood but by fire. And under her name, I wrote one more, hope. The night before the final storm was the quietest I'd known since this hell began. The sky hung low, heavy with the threat of rain. But all around us, the ragtag group of survivors, the children, the fighters, there was a tension so thick it could choke a man's soul. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every whisper a warning. Lily sat by the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames like twin stars. She no longer looked like the scared little girl I'd met months ago. She was steel and resolve wrapped in the skin of a child who had seen too much. The brass key, the photographs, the letter, those pieces of a shattered past that had brought us all together, were now tucked safely in a worn leather satchel she kept close. You ready? I asked her. She nodded without speaking. We knew this was it. The final reckoning with the men who had haunted our lives since the auction block, Kane's ghost still lurking in the shadows, even though he was gone. His men, his network, and the corruption that had seeped into every corner of the territory were all that remained. The plan was simple, reckless, and maybe insane. We'd storm the old Silver Creek mine, the secret prison where those poor children had suffered and disappeared. We weren't just freeing prisoners. We were tearing down the last stronghold of a nightmare that had gripped the land for years. Rayburn had gathered the local outlaws and a handful of honest lawmen who still believed in justice. Doc Morrison was ready with medicine, and Tommy was no longer the scared boy who'd clung to his sister on that auction block. He was a leader now, fierce and fearless. As dawn broke, we moved. The mine lay hidden behind the waterfall at Miller's Canyon, just like the letter had said. The roar of water masked our approach, but we were deaf to everything but the pounding of our own hearts. The entrance was guarded, but we took them by surprise. Bullets tore through the air, shouts echoed off the rock walls, and in the chaos, the children hidden inside stirred, unsure but hopeful. Inside the tunnels, the air was thick with dust and despair. We found the cages empty now, torn open and scattered. The evidence of cruelty was everywhere. Rusted tools, scraps of clothing, whispered echoes of pain. But then, deeper in the darkness, we found them. Huddled in the shadows, gaunt faces lifted in silent thanks. They were alive. I looked at Tommy, then Lily, then Martha, and felt the weight of everything. The losses, the fights, the sacrifices. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about hope. And then we heard the footsteps. Kane's men, or what was left of them, rushing to retake what they thought was theirs. There was no turning back. The final battle was brutal. Shots rang out like thunder inside the mine. The walls shook. Men fell. But we held. Lily stood at the front, her voice calm but fierce, directing the others like a general. Tommy covered the rear, his aim steady. Rayburn fought like a wildcat, and Doc Morrison tended to the wounded, moving swiftly. At one point, I came face to face with the last man I wanted to see, Thaddeus Kane's brother, a cold-eyed brute with a twisted smile. We circled, guns drawn. The fight was quick, merciless. When I stood over him, breathing heavy, I realized something. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about breaking the cycle. When the dust settled, the mine was ours. The children were safe. The corrupt leaders arrested or fled. The ledger, the proof, and the testimony we'd gathered were enough to bring the whole rotten system to light. Weeks later, the town was different. The auctions stopped. The orphanages reopened under watchful eyes. The survivors, scarred but unbroken, started to build lives. Martha's ranch became a sanctuary, a home where the children laughed again. Lily and Tommy, once shadows of fear, blossomed in the safety we fought so hard to win. And me? I finally laid down my guns. Sometimes, I walk the dusty streets of this small town and think back to the auction block where it all began, to the fear in those children's eyes and the hope I dared to carry for them. The West is harsh, unforgiving, but as long as there are people willing to stand, to fight, and to protect the innocent, there's a chance for something better. That's the story I want you to remember. Because from ashes, even the smallest flame can grow into a wildfire. And sometimes, just sometimes, that wildfire changes everything. If you were in the lead character's shoes, would you fight the same battle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video. Be sure to explore the other videos on your screen for more gripping stories.